Hey guys, tonight we're stepping through the servants' entrance into a world that kept the grand machine of Victorian England running. A place of backstairs whispers and front door formality, where an entire invisible army worked to make respectability look effortless. If you've ever wondered what it was like to live in the shadow of the dining room, to rise before dawn in a house that never thanked you, this one's for you. Before you settle in, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy drifting off to deeply factual, mildly unsettling history.
You wake to darkness so complete it feels like velvet pressed against your eyes. The air in the attic room tastes of coal dust and yesterday's cabbage. Your bed, a narrow iron frame with a mattress stuffed with horsehair that's given up pretending to be comfortable, creaks as you shift. The blanket is thin enough to read through, and the room is cold enough to make your breath visible in the sliver of moonlight from the small window. Then it comes, the bell. Not the gentle chime of a parlor clock, but the sharp, insistent clang of the servants' bell that hangs in the corridor like a small brass tyrant. It's 5:30 in the morning, and the house is waking from the bottom up, as it always does. The family upstairs sleeps on in their feather beds, their fires already laid but not yet lit, their morning tea still a dream away. You are a housemaid, and this is your life. Mainstream fact. In Victorian Britain, domestic service was the largest single occupation for women, with over 1 million employed by the 1890s. The work was grueling, the hours endless, and the pay modest, but it offered something invaluable to working-class girls: respectability, regular meals, and a roof over your head. You swing your legs out of bed, toes meeting the cold floorboards with a shock that wakes you more effectively than any alarm. Around you, the other servants are stirring. Mary, the scullery maid, is already pulling on her second dress, the one that's slightly less patched than her sleeping shift. Cook's heavy tread echoes from the floor below, a sound that makes everyone move faster. The uniform is your armor and your prison. The morning dress is dark, practical, designed to hide the dirt that will accumulate before breakfast. Your cap must be pinned just so, your apron spotless, your collar straight. There is no mirror up here, only a small square of polished tin that shows you a ghostly approximation of yourself. You check it anyway because being seen improperly dressed is worse than being seen at all.
You've learned to dress in the dark with the skill of a magician, though the only thing you make disappear is your own reflection. The servants' quarters are a country within a country, tucked into the attic and basement of grand houses like London nesting dolls. Up here, under the eaves, the ceilings slope so dramatically that anyone over 5 feet tall learns to walk in a perpetual crouch. The walls are bare plaster, occasionally decorated with damp patches that bloom like pessimistic flowers. In winter, frost forms on the inside of the windows in patterns that would be beautiful if they weren't so bitterly cold. You descend the back stairs, the narrow, uncarpeted steps that servants use exclusively. These stairs are steeper than the main staircase, darker, and infinitely more treacherous when you're carrying a coal scuttle or a hip bath full of water. The walls are painted a serviceable brown that hides handprints and the occasional desperate grab for balance. Quirky tidbit. Many grand houses were designed with servants' passages hidden behind the walls, creating a parallel universe where staff could move unseen. Some had spy holes in the wallpaper, allowing servants to check if a room was occupied before entering. The family could pretend their needs were met by magic, while the servants performed an elaborate choreography of invisibility. The kitchen is the heart of the servants' world, a vast cavern of heat and activity that never truly sleeps. The range, a massive iron beast that requires constant feeding, already glows with Cook's early efforts. Copper pots hang from hooks like civilized weapons, their surfaces so well polished you could use them for mirrors, though cook would have your head if you tried. Cook herself is a formidable woman whose kingdom extends from the larder to the scullery, and whose word is law in everything edible. She's already chopping onions with the efficiency of someone who's done this 10,000 times and expects to do it 10,000 more. Her face is red from the heat, her hands moving in a blur of competence. "You're late," she says without looking up. You're not late. You're precisely on time. But Cook operates on a different temporal plane, one where everything should have been done yesterday and preferably twice. The scullery maid has already started on the mountain of dishes from last night's dinner, her hands red and raw in the cold water. There's no running hot water down here, only the cold tap and whatever you can heat in kettles. The sink is deep enough to drown in, stained with years of use and surrounded by a graveyard of broken crockery waiting for someone to decide its fate. Your first task is to clean out the grates in the upstairs rooms, a job that must be completed before the family wakes. You gather your tools: a metal bucket for ashes, a dustpan and brush so worn the bristles point in directions that defy geometry, newspapers for wrapping the ash, and a cloth for wiping down the marble surrounds. The work is dirty, back-breaking, and must be done in near silence. You move through the sleeping house like a ghost, opening doors with infinite care, kneeling before cold fireplaces, and scooping out yesterday's ashes. Each room has its own personality. The master's study smells of tobacco and leather, the mistress's sitting room of lavender and secrets. The morning room of nothing much, because it's only used for appearances.
The hierarchy below stairs is as rigid as anything upstairs. The butler and housekeeper reign supreme, their authority unquestioned in their respective domains. Below them come the lady's maid and valet, who serve the mistress and master directly and therefore float slightly above the common herd. Then the cook, who outranks everyone when it comes to food. Then you, the housemaids, in order of seniority. Then the scullery maid and kitchen maid, who occupy the lowest rung and do the worst jobs. At the very bottom, existing in a state of perpetual grime and grievance, is the boot boy, who blacks every shoe in the house and dreams of the day he might be promoted to footman. Joke 3. The boot boy claims he can judge character by footwear, which mainly means he's judged everyone in the house as needs better shoes and called it philosophy. The morning routine is a ballet of efficiency and tradition. While the family breakfasts, you're upstairs making beds, emptying chamber pots, tidying rooms, and trying not to think too hard about what you're doing. The work is intimate in ways that feel invasive. You know which family members kick off their sheets, who reads late into the night, who keeps letters under their pillow. Chamber pots must be emptied into slop buckets, carried downstairs, emptied into the earth closet if the house is modern, or the cesspit if it isn't, washed, dried, and returned to their commodes before anyone needs them again. It's a job that requires a strong stomach, stronger arms, and the ability to convince yourself you're doing something other than what you're clearly doing. The earth closet is Victorian engineering at its most optimistic. It's essentially a chair with a bucket underneath and a hopper of dry earth that's released with each use to cover the deposit. It's better than nothing, which is what many households had before. It's worse than actual plumbing, which some households are beginning to install. Mainstream fact: indoor plumbing was still a luxury in many Victorian homes, even wealthy ones. The flush toilet, though invented earlier, didn't become standard until late in the century. This meant that handling human waste was a daily reality for housemaids, who performed this task with as much dignity as could be mustered, while carrying a bucket of night soil down 3 flights of stairs. You scrub, dust, polish, and arrange with mechanical precision. Each room has its requirements. The drawing room must be perfect for afternoon callers. The dining room must be set for lunch. The bedrooms must look untouched, as if the family members materialized fully dressed from the ether rather than leaving a trail of discarded clothing and personal items. Dusting alone is an epic task in a Victorian house. Every surface sprouts ornaments like a garden grows weeds. Porcelain figures, brass candlesticks, silver frames, crystal vases, marble busts, stuffed birds under glass domes, and enough decorative nonsense to stock a small museum. Each item must be lifted, dusted, and replaced in exactly the same position.
The housekeeper checks your work with eyes like a hunting hawk. She runs a white-gloved finger along picture rails, peers under beds, and inspects corners with the dedication of someone searching for evidence of moral decay. A speck of dust is not just a cleaning failure, it's a personal affront to the entire household. You learn quickly that standards here are both exacting and arbitrary. The mistress wants the antimacassars arranged just so, but can't quite explain what just so means. The master wants his study dusted, but nothing moved, which is physically impossible, but must be achieved anyway. The children want their toys tidied, but not organized, because organization destroys the complicated system they've developed for knowing which lead soldier is the brave one. By mid-morning, you've been awake for 5 hours, completed 3 hours' worth of heavy labor, and haven't stopped moving except to stand still during prayers. Your back aches, your knees complain, and your hands have developed that peculiar servant's roughness that no amount of lanolin can quite soften. But there's a rhythm to it, a satisfaction in tasks completed and rooms transformed. The house is waking fully now, filling with life and light. Deliveries arrive at the servants' entrance. The butcher with his parcels wrapped in paper and string. The fishmonger with his basket of scales and possibilities. The baker's boy with bread still warm from the oven. The morning passes in a blur of activity that somehow feels both frantic and routine. This is the machinery of respectable life, and you are one of its essential gears, turning endlessly in the shadows while the bright parts of the house gleam in the attention of the family and their guests. Somewhere upstairs, the mistress is planning her day over a second cup of tea. She will write letters, receive callers, perhaps visit the dressmaker or attend a charity meeting. Her biggest decision might be which gloves to wear. You will spend the day ensuring she never has to think about coal, dust, chamber pots, or any of the 100 mundane necessities that make gracious living possible. The morning bell rang hours ago. The day stretches ahead like an unexplored country. You wipe your hands on your apron, take a breath that tastes of coal smoke and industry, and carry on. Because this is service, and service, like the house itself, never sleeps.
Mrs. Blackwood sits in her parlor like a queen in miniature, her kingdom measured in linen cupboards and storeroom keys. The housekeeper's room is her private domain, a space that other servants enter only when summoned and leave as quickly as politeness allows. It smells of lavender sachets and the particular anxiety that comes from being responsible for everything while controlling nothing. She's reviewing the weekly accounts when you knock, and the sound makes you feel instantly guilty of crimes you haven't even considered committing yet. "Come in," she says, without looking up from her ledger. You enter the sanctum. The room is small but comfortable by servant standards, which means it has a chair that doesn't actively plot your discomfort and a rug that remembers being soft. A fire burns in the grate, a luxury that reminds everyone of Mrs. Blackwood's status. On the walls hang prints of improving subjects, Highland cattle, stern men in wigs, and a tearful maiden who appears to be regretting a decision involving a boat. Mrs. Blackwood is 50-something, dressed in black silk that whispers authority with every movement. Her keys hang from her waist on a chatelaine, a jangling announcement of her power. There's a key for the linen cupboard, the china closet, the storeroom, the wine cellar, though the butler contests his right to that one regularly, and a small key that no one knows the purpose of, but everyone fears. Quirky tidbit. The chatelaine, that decorative keyholder worn at the waist, was both practical and symbolic. It marked the housekeeper as the keeper of the household's treasures and trust. Some chatelaines were elaborate affairs of silver and enamel, family heirlooms passed from housekeeper to housekeeper like ceremonial swords. "The morning rooms need attention," she says, still not looking at you. The mistress commented on dust on the mantelpiece. Your heart sinks. You cleaned that mantelpiece yesterday. You cleaned it so thoroughly that the marble probably lost a layer. But dust, like criticism, finds a way. "Yes, ma'am," you say, because there's no other answer. "And Mary has broken another cup." This is stated as fact, not accusation, but it hangs in the air like a sword waiting to drop. Broken crockery comes out of wages. The scullery maid can ill afford another deduction. "I'll speak to her, ma'am." Mrs. Blackwood finally looks up, her eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed spectacles. "See that you do. We cannot have carelessness. Carelessness is the first step toward moral decline." You nod, wondering what the second step is, and whether it involves more broken cups. Mainstream fact. Housekeepers occupied a unique position in Victorian households. They were servants, but superior servants, often addressed as Mrs., whether married or not, as a mark of respect. They managed the female staff, controlled household supplies, and served as the mistress's deputy. A good housekeeper could make a household run like clockwork. A bad one could make everyone's life a misery while the house fell apart around her. Mrs. Blackwood returns to her ledger, dismissing you with silence. You retreat carefully, because turning your back on the housekeeper feels vaguely treasonous. The housekeeping department is a world of fierce organization and quiet warfare. Everything has its place, its proper time, its correct method. Beds are made with hospital corners tight enough to bounce coins. Silver is polished on Tuesdays. Carpets are beaten on Fridays, weather permitting.
Windows are washed monthly, or more often, if the London grime decides to stage a particularly aggressive campaign. The linen cupboard is Mrs. Blackwood's pride, shelves stacked with sheets, tablecloths, towels, and pillowcases, all sorted by quality and use. The best linens, marked with the family monogram, are for guests. The second best for family use, the third best for the servants' rooms. Everything is counted, inventoried, and checked for wear. You're sent to collect clean sheets for the guest bedrooms. There are visitors expected, which means extra work for everyone, and extra anxiety for Mrs. Blackwood, who must ensure the house impresses without appearing to make any effort to impress. The linen smells of lavender and thyme, that peculiar scent that's part soap, part storage, and part the accumulated memories of 1,000 nights' sleep. You carry the stack carefully, because dropping linen is only slightly less catastrophic than setting the house on fire. Guest preparations are an art form. The bedroom must be spotless, the bed made with mathematical precision, the water pitcher filled, the towels arranged, fresh flowers in a vase, and potpourri in a bowl that makes the room smell like someone tried to bottle a garden, and partially succeeded. The chamber pot must be pristine, even though mentioning it aloud would cause everyone to die of embarrassment. Joke 1. You've become an expert at pretending chamber pots don't exist, while simultaneously ensuring they're always exactly where they're needed, which is either a useful skill or evidence you've gone slightly mad. Mrs. Blackwood inspects the room with the thoroughness of a military general reviewing troops before battle. She checks the bed by pressing down on the corners, testing for lumps or insufficient firmness. She opens drawers to ensure they're lined with fresh paper. She sniffs the air, checking for any hint of damp or yesterday's cooking. "Satisfactory," she finally pronounces, which from Mrs. Blackwood is roughly equivalent to a standing ovation. The housekeeper's relationship with the mistress is complex, a dance of deference and management where both parties pretend that the other is entirely in control. The mistress gives orders, which Mrs. Blackwood receives with perfect courtesy before translating them into actual achievable tasks. When the mistress wants the house looking fresh, Mrs. Blackwood orders a full spring cleaning. When the mistress mentions economies, Mrs. Blackwood reduces candle usage and instructs cook to be creative with yesterday's roast. Every morning, Mrs. Blackwood attends the mistress in her sitting room for orders. She carries a notebook and listens while the mistress mentions dinner parties, charity events, and her concerns about the under-butler's posture. The housekeeper nods, takes notes, and internally calculates how many of these requests are actually possible. The mistress, for her part, manages the impossible trick of being completely dependent on Mrs. Blackwood while maintaining the fiction that she's running the household herself. It's a performance that both women understand perfectly and never acknowledge.
Mainstream fact. The daily meeting between mistress and housekeeper was a ritual in Victorian homes, typically occurring mid-morning after the mistress had finished her breakfast and correspondence. Here, the mistress would discuss menus, though the cook often had the real say, social engagements, and household matters. The housekeeper would report any issues, request supplies, and discreetly mention any servant problems that required the mistress's attention. Below stairs, Mrs. Blackwood rules with a combination of efficiency and strategic forgiveness. She knows exactly which maids are courting followers, young men who hang around servants' entrances hoping for conversation, which ones sneak extra biscuits from the larder, and which ones can be trusted with the good china. She chooses her battles, because running a household requires both discipline and the wisdom to know when to look the other way. Her relationship with the butler, Mr. Graves, is a cold war punctuated by truces over tea. They disagree about jurisdiction. Is the dining room his domain or hers? Expenditure. Does the wine cellar really need that much brandy? Philosophy. Should servants be ruled by fear or respect? They are unfailingly polite to each other, which makes their mutual disdain even more obvious. At the servants' meals, they sit at opposite ends of the table, like divorced royalty forced to attend the same state dinner. The linen inventory is a monthly ordeal that you've learned to dread. Mrs. Blackwood counts every sheet, pillowcase, and tablecloth, comparing the numbers against her records while you stand by with increasing awareness of how easy it would be for things to go missing. Tablecloths develop holes, sheets wear thin, towels simply vanish into whatever dimension claims socks from the wash. Each loss must be accounted for, explained, and documented. Was it legitimate wear? Accident? Theft? Mrs. Blackwood's ledger recognizes no category for mysteriously ceased to exist, so everything must be assigned blame or absolution. Quirky tidbit: large households might employ a laundry maid specifically for washing, but in many homes, laundry was sent out to a washerwoman who collected and returned it weekly. This created opportunities for items to go missing, either genuinely lost or lost, leading to detailed marking systems. Some households marked their linens with embroidered monograms or indelible ink to prove ownership, turning Laundry Day into a detective story. You spend an afternoon helping Mrs. Blackwood inventory the storeroom, a cave of preserved provisions that smells like vinegar, sugar, and delayed dinners. Shelves hold jars of jam, pickled onions, dried fruit, spices in labeled tins, and mysterious items that might be culinary experiments or evidence for future investigations. Everything is recorded: quantity, quality, cost. Mrs. Blackwood's fingers move across her ledger pages with the confidence of someone who knows exactly how much a pound of tea costs and what it means that consumption is up this quarter. Is someone taking extra? Is cook being wasteful? Or is the mistress simply entertaining more?
The keys jangle as she reaches for a high shelf, checking the sugar stocks. Sugar is valuable, easily stolen, and therefore watched with paranoid vigilance. A missing pound of sugar could indicate anything from a sweet-tooth housemaid to a cook who's trading supplies for favors with the grocer's boy. Count the candles, she instructs, and you do, standing on a stool to reach the boxes stacked in the dark corner. 47 candles, down from 50 last week. You report the number. She notes it. The investigation of 3 missing candles will probably occupy her thoughts until dinner. Joke 2. Mrs. Blackwood once spent 3 days tracking down a missing fish slice, only to discover the butler had moved it to his pantry for safekeeping, a crime he refused to acknowledge as anything other than proper organization. The housekeeper's authority extends beyond inventory and inspection. She's also responsible for the moral welfare of the female staff, which means she's constantly vigilant for signs of impropriety, attachment, or happiness that might lead somewhere unsanctioned. Male servants are viewed with suspicion. The footmen, with their good looks and livery, are particularly dangerous. Young housemaids must be protected from their own hearts and hormones. Mrs. Blackwood enforces a strict separation, ensuring that maids and footmen don't linger in corridors together or exchange glances that might blossom into trouble. One of the kitchen maids, Sarah, has been seen smiling at the under-footman. Mrs. Blackwood notices immediately and delivers a lecture on the dangers of forming attachments. Sarah, who was just being polite to someone who handed her a plate, now cannot make eye contact with any male servant without feeling like a criminal. The rules about followers are strict and arbitrary. No young man may call on a servant unless he has the approval of both the housekeeper and the mistress. He may visit only at designated times, in designated spaces, and never alone. The courtship, if it can be called that, happens under supervision so intense it makes chaperones at society balls look relaxed. Mainstream fact: keeping company was a privilege that could be revoked at any moment. Servants caught in unauthorized relationships faced dismissal without reference, which meant unemployment and often destitution. Despite this, love found ways. Servants married, though they usually had to leave service to do so. Many households had rules against married servants, believing marriage incompatible with the total dedication service demanded. Mrs. Blackwood's own history is a mystery wrapped in black silk. She never speaks of her past, her family, or how she came to service. There's a miniature portrait on her mantelpiece showing a young soldier, but no one dares ask about it. The keys she wears might unlock cupboards in storerooms, but her own past remains firmly bolted. She's been with this family for 23 years, arriving as an under-housekeeper and working her way up through competence and survival. She knows every room, every season, every family crisis and triumph. She knows which floorboards creak, which windows stick, and which members of the family can be trusted with household information.
In the evening, when her duties are done and the house has settled into its nighttime rhythms, Mrs. Blackwood retires to her parlor. She reads, usually improving literature with titles that suggest moral fiber might be built through persistent boredom. She darns, because even housekeepers have stockings that develop holes. She reviews tomorrow's tasks and worries about everything simultaneously. Sometimes, very rarely, you hear her laugh at something in her book, a sound so unexpected it makes you realize she might once have been young, might once have had other dreams before service claimed her. But in the morning, she'll be back in her armor of black silk and jangling keys, ready to wage war against dust, disorder, and the eternal human tendency toward chaos. You finish your tasks in the guest room and report back. Mrs. Blackwood inspects your work with a nod that contains no praise, but also no criticism, which is the highest accolade you're likely to receive. The drawing-room needs attention before tea, she says, consulting her mental schedule of an infinitely long day. And tell Mary to be more careful with the cups. We're running out of ways to explain breakage to the mistress. You promise to convey this message with appropriate gravity, though you know Mary is already terrified of Mrs. Blackwood and will probably drop another cup from sheer nervous anxiety at being reminded not to drop cups. The afternoon sun slants through the window of Mrs. Blackwood's parlor, catching the dust motes she would be horrified to discover exist in her personal space. For a moment, the room looks almost peaceful, a small island of order in a house that runs on invisible labor and visible rules. Then a bell rings somewhere deep in the house's nervous system, and the peace shatters. Someone wants something, and that something requires immediate attention, fresh linens, or possibly a miracle. Mrs. Blackwood rises, keys jingling, and you follow, because service calls, and service must answer, always and without question.
The servants' hall is the theater where the household's other life plays out, the one the family upstairs never sees and mostly tries not to imagine. It's a long room in the basement, lit by windows set high in the walls that show the boots of passers-by on the street above. The furniture is serviceable, the walls bare except for a list of rules that everyone has memorized and mostly ignores, and a calendar that marks saints' days and half-holidays like distant promised lands. This is where servants eat, rest during brief breaks, and construct a society as complex and hierarchical as anything in the drawing room above. Lunchtime brings everyone together in a careful arrangement of precedence. Mr. Graves, the butler, sits at the head of the table, his posture so correct it looks uncomfortable. Mrs. Blackwood sits at the foot, a position that's theoretically subservient but practically equivalent. The lady's maid and valet sit next to the butler and housekeeper respectively, their proximity to the family upstairs translating into proximity to the power seats below. Then come the housemaids in order of seniority, the footman trying not to look at the housemaids while absolutely looking at them, the cook, who technically outranks almost everyone but chooses to remain somewhat apart, and finally the scullery maid and boot boy, who sit at the far end and get whatever's left. The meal is served with more formality than you'd expect for people who've been working since dawn. The upper servants are served first, the lower servants wait. Conversation is stilted, supervised by Mr. Graves's disapproving presence and Mrs. Blackwood's sharp ears. Joke 1. The butler can convey more disapproval with his eyebrows than most people can manage with a full speech. A talent that's either impressive or terrifying, depending on whether you're the recipient. The food is plain but adequate. Cold meat from yesterday's dinner, bread, cheese, pickles, and tea that's been brewing since breakfast and now has opinions about everything. The portions are calculated to sustain labor without inspiring thoughts of luxury. This is fuel, not pleasure, though cook sometimes sneaks in a cake when the mistress's back is turned and her mood is generous. Mainstream fact. Servants' meals followed strict conventions. The upper servants might retire to the housekeeper's room or steward's room for tea and dessert, a privilege that separated them from the common servants and caused exactly the kind of resentment you'd expect.
This created a two-tier system below stairs that mirrored the class divisions above, proving that humans will construct hierarchies anywhere you give them a table and some chairs. The conversation is a minefield. You cannot gossip about the family directly, but you can discuss their habits, preferences, and peculiarities in such detail that gossip becomes unnecessary. You cannot criticize the butler or housekeeper, but you can sympathize when someone mentions how particular they are. You cannot admit to reading anything except improving literature, but somehow everyone knows who's borrowing penny dreadfuls from the Bootboys collection. Sarah, one of the housemaids, mentions that the mistress is redecorating the morning room. This information spreads like wildfire, wrapped in polite interest. Redecorating means new fabrics, possibly new furniture, which means more cleaning, more care, and more opportunities for things to go catastrophically wrong. Thomas, the first footman, who is handsome in that specifically useless way that makes everyone simultaneously attracted and annoyed, mentions that he overheard the master discussing railway shares. This is received with the appropriate level of feigned indifference, while everyone internally calculates what financial instability might mean for the household and their positions. The lady's maid, Miss Pierce, maintains a dignified silence that suggests she knows things worth knowing and will never share them with such common folk. She picked up this attitude from the mistress, along with a taste for fine fabrics, and a conviction that her elevated position means she needn't actually speak to housemaids unless giving orders.
Quirky tidbit. Ladies' maids occupied an odd position in the household hierarchy. They dressed and undressed their mistresses, styled their hair, maintained their wardrobes, and became confidants to secrets the mistress would never share with equals. This intimacy created a strange dynamic. The lady's maid might know that her mistress cries into her pillow at night, but she still can't sit in the drawing room or use the front stairs. After lunch, there's a brief period that might technically be called a break, though it's mostly used for jammy tasks that don't fit into the official schedule. You catch up with Mary, who's still upset about the broken cup and now terrified that Mrs. Blackwood thinks she's careless. "It just slipped," she says, her hands demonstrating the tragedy in slow motion. "The handles on those cups are too small. They're designed to be dropped." You offer sympathy while privately thinking that Mary should probably stop gesturing while discussing broken crockery as she nearly knocks over a milk jug in the process of explaining how the cup slipped. The scullery is Mary's kingdom, though kingdom is generous for a room that smells of old food, wet stone, and despair. She works here 14 hours a day, washing dishes in cold water, scrubbing pots until her hands are raw, and trying to maintain enthusiasm for life despite overwhelming evidence that the universe is made of dirty plates. The sink is as big as a bathtub, stained with decades of use. There's a copper for boiling water, though using it requires permission from cook and usually isn't worth the interrogation about why you need hot water for washing up. Cold water builds character, apparently, along with chilblains and a deep resentment of everyone who eats food. Mainstream fact: scullery maids had the worst job in service. They worked the longest hours for the lowest pay, often starting as young as 12 or 13. Their hands were constantly wet and red, their backs permanently bent from leaning over sinks, and their prospects for advancement dependent on someone else leaving or dying. Many scullery maids dreamed of becoming housemaids, a promotion that meant slightly better work, slightly better pay, and the revolutionary privilege of occasionally being dry. The afternoon brings afternoon tea preparations, which is an elaborate ritual that makes Japanese tea ceremonies look casual. The family takes tea at 4, which means preparation begins at 3. The best china must be selected, inspected for chips, and arranged. The silver must be polished. The tablecloth must be spotless. The cucumber sandwiches must be cut with mathematical precision, crusts removed, arranged in patterns that suggest casual elegance while requiring intense concentration. You help set up the drawing room, transforming it from a normal room into a stage for social performance. The tea table is positioned to catch the afternoon light. Chairs are arranged to facilitate conversation while maintaining proper distance. Fresh flowers are placed where they can be admired, but not knocked over by enthusiastic gesturing. Thomas, the first footman, will serve the tea. He changes into his formal livery, a costume that includes knee breeches, white stockings, and a coat with more buttons than strictly necessary. He looks like he's escaped from a historical painting, which is precisely the point. The family's wealth and taste must be demonstrated through every detail, including the decorative quality of their servants.
Joke 2. Thomas spends more time getting dressed than the mistress does, though he'll never admit it. His hair alone requires 15 minutes of careful arranging, making him either very dedicated or very vain, possibly both. The callers begin arriving at 4 precisely, because being fashionably late isn't fashionable when it comes to tea. Ladies in elaborate dresses navigate the front steps, their skirts managing to take up more space than the average room. They're accompanied by maids who wait in the servants' hall, creating an auxiliary tea party with less good china and more honest conversation. You retreat to the servants' hall, where these visiting maids provide entertainment and gossip from other households. They discuss their mistresses with the careful diplomacy of people who could be quoted, comparing working conditions the way their employers compare dressmakers. Mrs. Hartford changes her mind 6 times about what to wear, one maid sighs, and then blames me when she's late. At least you don't have to dress Miss Caroline, another responds. She won't stand still. Yesterday she wriggled so much I nearly pinned her bodice to her actual person. The visiting maids are also assessed for their own quality. A well-dressed maid reflects well on her mistress. A shabby maid suggests economies or poor management. It's another layer of performance, where even the servants must advertise their employer's status through their appearance. Quirky tidbit. Some wealthy families provided elaborate uniforms for their servants, particularly footmen and ladies' maids, who would be seen by visitors. These uniforms were expensive and often custom-made, representing a significant investment. Footmen were sometimes chosen partly for their height and appearance, as if they were decorative items rather than people. Some advertisements for footmen positions specified height requirements and even hair color, turning employment into a beauty pageant. While the ladies upstairs discuss charity work and subtle character assassination wrapped in compliments, the servants downstairs discuss the reality behind the performances. They know which families are struggling financially but maintaining appearances, which marriages are unhappy, which children are causing scandal, which households are pleasant to work in, and which are tyrannical nightmares. This knowledge is power, but it's power that can never be openly exercised. A servant who gossips about their employers can be dismissed without reference, which means they'll never work in a good house again. So the information circulates below stairs, a parallel narrative that the family upstairs would be horrified to discover exists. Mrs. Blackwood enters the servants' hall, and conversation immediately moderates. She's checking that the visiting maids are being properly entertained, which means given tea and not allowed to see anything that might embarrass the household. Everything satisfactory, she asks, her tone suggesting that no isn't an acceptable answer. The visiting maids chorus that everything is lovely, thank you, because criticizing someone else's servants' hall is like criticizing their religion, technically possible but socially catastrophic. After tea, there's the clearing up, which takes longer than the tea itself. The good china must be washed with reverence and anxiety, each piece a potential disaster. The silver must be polished again because fingerprints are apparently a moral failing. The drawing room must be restored to its pre-tea state as if the afternoon's socializing was a pleasant dream that left no trace. Mainstream fact. The Victorian obsession with afternoon tea created entire industries and employment opportunities. Tea services became elaborate affairs of porcelain and silver. Etiquette books devoted chapters to proper tea behavior. Servants were trained in specific choreography of tea service, from the angle at which to pour to the correct order of offering cakes. It was a ritual that reinforced class distinctions while pretending to be about nothing more serious than a nice cup of tea. The evening meal for servants is a more relaxed affair, though relaxed is relative in a household where the butler considers smiling a form of moral weakness.
The day's work is winding down, though not finished. The family will dine at 8, which means more service, more cleaning, more performance. But for now, there's stew and bread and the kind of tired camaraderie that comes from surviving another day together. The conversation flows more freely. Thomas tells a joke that's mildly inappropriate and immediately regretted when Mrs. Blackwood glares. Sarah mentions that she saw a poster for a music hall show, sparking a discussion about half-holidays and whether anyone will get time off to attend. Half-holidays are precious, rare afternoons and evenings when servants are allowed out. They're carefully scheduled to ensure the household doesn't use too many staff at once. You might get one afternoon a month, if you're lucky, and an evening every fortnight. These are your windows to the outside world, your chances to remember you're a person and not just a function. On half-holidays, servants transform. The uniforms come off, replaced by carefully saved best dresses and coats. Hair is arranged in styles that aren't practical for work, but are pretty for promenading. You walk out the servants' entrance as yourself rather than as your position. The city is full of entertainment designed for servants' modest budgets and limited time. Music halls offer rowdy shows with songs that make Mrs. Blackwood's feared morality seem even more oppressive. Parks provide space to walk and see people who aren't your employers. Tea shops offer the revolutionary experience of being served rather than serving. Quirky tidbit. Some wealthy families provided elaborate uniforms for their servants, particularly footmen and ladies' maids who would be seen by visitors. These uniforms were expensive and often custom-made, representing a significant investment. Footmen were sometimes chosen partly for their height and appearance, as if they were decorative items rather than people. Some advertisements for footmen positions specified height requirements and even hair color, turning employment into a beauty pageant.
You spend your half-holidays walking, mostly, because walking is free. You visit your family when you can, though your mother's house is 2 omnibus rides away, and the fare eats into your carefully saved wages. You write letters on scraps of paper, telling your sister about life and service, editing out the chamber pots and emphasizing the parts that sound almost glamorous. Back in the servants' hall after dinner service, exhaustion settles over everyone like a comfortable blanket. The butler retires to his pantry, where he keeps the silver and his dignity in separate locked cabinets. Mrs. Blackwood retreats to her parlor for her evening duties. The footmen change out of their livery with relief, becoming human-shaped again instead of decorative. The housemaids sit together, mending and gossiping in whispers. There's a romance blooming between Sarah and the underfootman, conducted entirely through glances and the occasional passed note. Everyone knows, including Mrs. Blackwood, who's choosing to pretend she doesn't until it becomes impossible to ignore. "He said I had nice eyes," Sarah whispers, blushing. "What did you say?" you ask. "Nothing. I just stared at him like a startled fish. Very romantic." The scullery maid falls asleep in her chair, exhausted from another day of cold water and dirty plates. Someone gently wakes her before Mrs. Blackwood notices, because sleeping on duty is a crime that warrants lectures about the dangers of idleness.
At 4 in the morning, when even the rats are still deciding whether to start their day, Cook is already in her kitchen. She's been up since 3 because bread waits for no one, and the household must have fresh rolls for breakfast, even if it kills her. Which it might, eventually, but not today, because she has far too much to do. The kitchen is her undisputed territory, a cavern of heat and activity, where her word is law, and even the butler knows better than to interfere. The range, fed throughout the night by the kitchen maid, glows with malevolent cheer. Copper pots hang like a metallic chorus, waiting for their cues. The great wooden table in the center is scarred with decades of chopping, kneading, and the occasional pound of frustration. Cook's real name is Mrs. Henderson. Though she's not actually married, the Mrs. is a courtesy title, a mark of respect for her position. She's 40-something, built like someone who's been wrestling with dough for 20 years and winning. Her face is red from heat, her hands capable of precision and violence in equal measure, and her opinions on modern cooking trends could strip wallpaper at 10 paces. Mainstream fact: the cook occupied a unique position in Victorian households. She wasn't quite upper servants, but she definitely outranked the housemaids. Her skills could make or break a household's reputation. Dinner parties were social warfare conducted through menu cards, and the cook was the general. A good cook was treasured, well paid, and often impossible to live with. A bad cook was simply impossible. The bread dough has been rising overnight, and cook punches it down with the efficiency of someone settling personal grudges. She shapes rolls with practiced hands, each one identical to its siblings, because uniformity is godliness and unevenness is chaos. The kitchen maid, a girl named Agnes with flour permanently in her hair, tends the fires and assists with the kind of tasks that require more strength than skill. She hauls water, scrubs pots, and learns by watching cook work, hoping someday to rise from her current position of person who does everything no one else wants to do. "The range is too hot," cook announces, though the temperature is exactly what she specified an hour ago. Agnes adjusts the damper and prays this is correct, because cooked temper is hotter than any stove. The morning routine is a symphony of controlled chaos. Breakfast for the family must be ready by 9, which means cook must simultaneously manage multiple dishes in various stages of completion. Eggs are boiled to precise specifications. The master likes his soft, the mistress prefers hers hard, the children get whatever doesn't start a rebellion. Bacon is fried until crispy but not cremated. Kippers are grilled with the windows open because their smell is considered wholesome at the breakfast table but offensive everywhere else. Toast is made in precise batches because cold toast is apparently grounds for questioning cook's entire philosophy. Joke 1. Cook says the secret to good breakfast eggs is timing and prayer, though she's heavy on the timing and light on the prayer, suggesting her faith is primarily in herself and a reliable egg timer. The servants' breakfast happens earlier and with less ceremony. Porridge, bread, dripping if you're lucky, and tea strong enough to wake the dead and possibly offend them. Cook believes in substantial breakfasts for working people, which is generous, though the food itself suggests that substantial and enjoyable are unrelated concepts. She dishes out porridge with the authority of someone distributing rations during a siege, ensuring everyone gets exactly their share and not a spoonful more. Waste is a sin in Cook's theology, right after insulting her pastry and suggesting that French cuisine might have some merit. By 8 o'clock, the kitchen is a battlefield. Every surface is covered with ingredients, utensils, and Cook's escalating stress. The mistress has sent down word that there will be guests for dinner, 8 people instead of the usual family of 5. This information should have been provided yesterday, but the mistress apparently believes meals manifest through domestic magic rather than hours of preparation. Cook receives this news with a composure that would impress a military commander, though her grip on the wooden spoon suggests she's considering alternative uses for it. 8 people, she repeats, her voice carefully neutral. Tonight. Mrs. Blackwood, who brought the message, nods sympathetically. She knows what this means. The housekeeper and cook may disagree about everything else, but they're united in their opinion of last-minute dinner parties. The mistress suggests something French, Mrs. Blackwood adds, and then wisely retreats before cook can respond. Mainstream fact. Victorian dinner parties were elaborate affairs with multiple courses, each requiring different preparation methods and precise timing. A typical formal dinner might include soup, fish, entree, joint, game, pudding, and dessert, plus cheese and fruit. Everything had to emerge from the kitchen at the correct temperature and in the correct sequence.
a logistical achievement that required the organizational skills of a general and the patience of a saint. Cook immediately begins planning, her mind working through options like a chess master plotting 10 moves ahead. She'll need to send Agnes to the market for extra provisions. The fish will have to be purchased fresh this morning. The game birds will come from the poultrier. The vegetables from the greengrocer. She makes a list in her head because writing it down would suggest she needs help remembering, which would be an admission of weakness. "Agnes," she bellows, making the kitchen maid jump. "Market. List. Now." Agnes appears with paper and pencil, poised to write at dictation speed. Cook rattles off requirements: 3 pounds of the best turbot, capers, anchovies, a brace of pheasants, properly hung, fresh asparagus if Henderson has it, and tell him I'll know if it's yesterday's. Butter, unsalted, cream, and don't let them sell you milk with cream stirred in. I can tell the difference. Lemons, 6. Mushrooms, a pound. Sugar, loaf, not granulated, and get the good vanilla, not that rubbish with sawdust mixed in. Agnes scribbles frantically, her handwriting deteriorating into something that looks like a spider fell into an inkwell and died there. Croaky tidbit. Victorian cooks had complex relationships with suppliers. A good cook knew every butcher, fishmonger, and grocer in the area, and could tell the quality of ingredients at a glance. Suppliers knew that pleasing the cook of a wealthy household meant steady business, so they saved their best stock for favored customers. Cook, in turn, defended her suppliers fiercely, while simultaneously threatening to take her business elsewhere if quality slipped. It was economic warfare conducted through the medium of lamb chops and parsnips. With Agnes dispatched from the market, Cook begins preparing stock. The soup for tonight will be consommé, which requires hours of careful simmering and clarifying. She sets a pot of beef bones, vegetables, and water on the stove, adding herbs with the precision of an apothecary preparing medicine. The kitchen fills with steam and the smell of cooking bones, a scent that's either appetizing or disturbing, depending on your relationship with meat and mortality. Mary appears from the scullery, hands red from washing the breakfast dishes, asking what Cook needs cleaned for dinner preparations. "Everything," Cook says flatly. "Every pot, every pan, every spoon, every surface. I want this kitchen cleaner than a hospital operating theater, because we're apparently cooking for royalty on an hour's notice." Mary retreats to her sink, understanding that today will be even endless than usual. The morning progresses in a blur of preparation. Pastry must be made for the tarts. Vegetables must be peeled, chopped, and stored in cold water. Fish must be scaled and gutted. Game birds must be plucked and dressed. The joint must be trimmed and tied. Every task requires skill, timing, and the ability to keep multiple processes running simultaneously, while also managing helpers who range from competent to catastrophic. Joke 2. Cook says the secret to good breakfast eggs is timing and prayer, though she's heavy on the timing and light on the prayer, suggesting her faith is primarily in herself and a reliable egg timer. Agnes returns from the market with a basket full of provisions and a story about the fishmonger trying to sell her yesterday's turbot disguised as today's turbot. Cook inspects the fish with the eye of someone who could spot deception through multiple layers of ice and optimism.
"Did you tell him I'd come down there myself if he tried to cheat me?" "Yes, ma'am." "And what did he say?" "He turned pale and gave me different fish." Cook nods, satisfied. Good. Fear keeps fishmongers honest. The afternoon becomes increasingly frantic. The consommé must be strained through muslin to achieve perfect clarity. The asparagus must be tied in bundles and cooked until just tender. The sauce for the fish must be prepared, which involves a delicate dance of butter, flour, and cream that will either become silky perfection or lumpy disaster, depending on temperature and divine favor. Cook makes the sauce herself, because this is not a task that can be delegated to someone who thinks whisking is optional. She stirs with the focus of someone performing brain surgery, watching the consistency, adjusting the heat, adding cream in a thin stream while whispering what might be instructions or might be threats against the sauce should it dare to curdle. Mainstream fact: Victorian sauces were the mark of culinary sophistication. French sauces, in particular, were considered essential for fashionable dining, despite many English cooks' personal opinions about French cuisine in general. Mastering sauces required years of practice and a level of attention that bordered on obsessive. A broken sauce could ruin a dish, embarrass the household, and possibly end a cook's employment if it happened at an important dinner. By 4 o'clock, the kitchen is both perfectly organized and absolute chaos. Every surface is covered with preparations in various stages. The consommé simmers clear and golden. The fish waits in a cold room. The game birds are ready for roasting. The vegetables are prepped. The tarts are baked. The table is set upstairs by the footmen, who are probably making mistakes that will require correction. Cook permits herself a brief sit-down with a cup of tea that's been brewing since breakfast and now tastes like punitive discipline in liquid form. She reviews her mental timeline. Soup at 8:30, fish at 9, entree at 9:30, joint at 10, game at 10:30, pudding at 11, dessert at 11:30. Each course must follow the previous one with clockwork precision, which means she'll be managing 7 different temperatures and 12 different timings while also ensuring the food looks presentable. Thomas appears at the kitchen door, resplendent in his serving livery, to ask what time dinner will be ready. 8:30, Cook says flatly, as I told you this morning and yesterday and the day before. Why do you keep asking? Just confirming, ma'am. If you need me to write it down, I will, in your blood if necessary. Thomas wisely retreats before Cook locates a writing implement and tests her threat. Joke 3. The footman and Cook maintain a relationship best described as armed neutrality, where both sides respect each other's competence while simultaneously believing the other side is fundamentally irritating and possibly doing it on purpose. The final preparations begin at 7. The joint goes into the oven, a magnificent piece of beef that cost more than a housemaid's monthly wages. The game birds follow. The fish poaches gently in court bouillon. The vegetables cook in precisely timed batches. The sauces are kept warm but not hot, because overheating will ruin them and Cook will have to murder someone, which would disrupt the dinner service. Agnes runs between the kitchen and the serving area, carrying dishes, receiving plates to be reheated or replaced, and generally functioning as a culinary courier in a very high-stakes restaurant with only one cook and a customer base that can fire everyone if dissatisfied. At 8:30 precisely, the soup goes up. Cook ladles it into porcelain bowls, garnishing each with a precise amount of julienned vegetables and a single leaf of parsley positioned with the care usually reserved for crown jewels. Thomas and the underfootman carry the bowls upstairs on silver trays, moving with the careful precision of people transporting nitroglycerin disguised as soup. Cook stands at the range, managing the next 6 courses with the calm focus of someone who's done this 100 times and will do it 100 more. Agnes assists, Mary washes, and the kitchen functions as a precision instrument for converting raw ingredients into social success. The courses flow upstairs with mechanical reliability. The fish is perfect, the sauce unbroken. The entree is praised by the master, according to Thomas's report. The joint is carved with ceremony and received with appropriate admiration. The game birds are tiny but perfectly roasted. The pudding wobbles when set down but maintains its structural integrity. The dessert is a triumph of spun sugar and preserved fruit that probably required a university degree in engineering to construct. By midnight, when the last course has been cleared and the family has retired to the drawing room for coffee and scandal, Cook sits in her kitchen surrounded by the wreckage of success. Every pot is dirty, every surface is sticky. Agnes and Mary are washing dishes with the glazed expression of soldiers after battle. The range still radiates heat like a small sun that's decided not to set out of spite. Mrs. Blackwood appears at the kitchen door with rare praise. The mistress was pleased. She said the dinner was excellent. Cook nods, accepting this as her due rather than a gift. Did she mention the asparagus? She said it was perfectly done. And the sauce? She particularly praised the sauce. Cook allows herself a small smile, the closest she comes to displaying emotion. Good. Now everyone get out of my kitchen. I need to sit in silence and contemplate why I do this to myself. The staff retreats, understanding that Cook's kingdom must be surrendered to her alone for the night. She'll sit here until 1 or 2 in the morning, planning tomorrow's menus, making lists, and possibly talking to her pots, which understand her better than most people do. Mainstream fact. Victorian sauces worked punishing hours, especially when entertaining. They were well compensated by servants' standards, earning perhaps £40 to £60 per year plus room and board in the 1880s. But the stress, heat, and physical demands meant many cooks retired early or died young from heart problems, exhaustion, or accidents. The kitchen was a dangerous place, filled with open flames, boiling liquids, sharp knives, and temperamental equipment. Yet good cooks were respected, even feared, because they held the household's reputation in their calloused hands. Tomorrow, it will begin again. Breakfast at 9, luncheon at 1, tea at 4, dinner at 8. Day after day, year after year, until Cook either retires, dies, or finally loses her temper completely and stabs someone with a fish knife, which she jokes about regularly and everyone believes is half serious. But tonight, she sits in her kingdom, surrounded by her battered soldiers of copper and iron, and feels the satisfaction of another campaign won. The family ate well, the guests were impressed, the household's reputation stands intact. And somewhere in her tired heart, beneath the layers of professional armor and cultivated temper, she knows that her work matters, that feeding people is an act of care, even when those people never see her, never thank her, and probably couldn't pick her out of a crowd. The range ticks as it cools, the kitchen settles into nighttime silence. Cook closes her eyes briefly, then opens them and begins tomorrow's planning, because rest is for people who don't run kitchens, and she has 17 years of momentum that won't stop now. The night claims the kitchen, but the kitchen never truly sleeps.
Mr. Graves sits in his pantry like a general in his command post, surrounded by the symbols of his authority: silver, wine, and disapproval. The pantry is his private domain, a room that other servants enter only when summoned or desperately foolish. It smells of metal polish, old leather, and the particular kind of superiority that can only be achieved through 40 years of service. The butler's pantry is part office, part treasury, and part personal shrine to the concept of proper service. The walls are lined with locked cabinets containing the household's silver, tea services, candelabras, serving dishes, and enough flatware to equip a small restaurant. Each piece is inventoried, polished regularly, and treated with more respect than some family members receive. Mr. Graves himself is 60. Silver-haired in a way that suggests careful planning rather than accident, and possessed of a posture so correct that it makes military officers look slovenly. His face has settled into an expression of permanent assessment, as if everyone who enters his field of vision is being judged and found slightly wanting. He's reviewing the wine cellar inventory when Thomas knocks timidly at the door. "Enter," Mr. Graves says, not looking up from his ledger. Thomas edges in, holding his livery coat. "Mr. Graves, sir, I was wondering about the button on my coat. It's coming loose." Mr. Graves finally looks up, his gaze moving from Thomas's face to the offending coat with the speed and precision of a sniper selecting a target. "A button should never come loose," he says, as if this is a moral principle rather than a mechanical reality. It suggests carelessness in either the wearing or the care of the garment. "Yes, sir. I was very careful, but—" "Are you suggesting the coat is defective?" Thomas realizes he's entered a logical trap and considers just throwing himself out the window to escape. "No, sir. I'll fix it immediately." "See that you do." A footman's appearance reflects on the entire household. When you stand at the door, you are not Thomas. You are the household's representative to the world. Every button must be secure. Every crease must be sharp. Every movement must be precise. Do you understand? Yes, Mr. Graves. Dismissed. Thomas retreats carefully, backing out of the pantry as if leaving the presence of royalty, which, in the household hierarchy, he essentially is. Joke 1. Mr. Graves could make the Queen feel improperly dressed, and his superpower is making perfectly reasonable people apologize for things that weren't their fault, while simultaneously feeling they somehow deserved the lecture. The butler occupies the pinnacle of the servant hierarchy, at least on the male side. He oversees the footman, manages the wine cellar, coordinates service at meals, answers the door, and serves as the master's personal attendant. He's responsible for the family's social face, ensuring that every visitor is received with appropriate ceremony and every social event runs with precision. Mainstream fact. Butlers in great houses wielded enormous authority and earned substantial salaries by servants' standards, perhaps £50 to £80 per year in the late Victorian period, plus room, board, and often gifts or bonuses. They controlled not just the household's daily operations, but also significant financial resources, managing accounts with tradesmen and sometimes receiving commissions on purchases. A butler's recommendation could make or break a merchant's business. Mr. Graves rises from his desk to inspect the silver for tonight's dinner. He unlocks a cabinet with one of the many keys he carries, revealing rows of silver gleaming in the lamplight. Each piece is wrapped in felt, stored with camphor to prevent tarnish, and tagged with a paper label noting its last use and polish date. The polishing will be done by the underbutler and footman, but Mr. Graves will inspect every piece personally before it goes upstairs. The underbutler, Mr. Jenkins, appears with cleaning cloths and polish. He's younger than Mr. Graves, only 50, and has been waiting 20 years to inherit the position of butler when Mr. Graves finally retires, which at the current rate will happen approximately never. They work in silence, polishing silver with practiced efficiency. The technique requires knowledge passed down through generations, gentle circular motions, regular pressure, attention to crevices and details. A properly polished piece of silver should gleam without seeming ostentatious, catch the light without screaming for attention. Quirky tidbit. Some butlers mixed their own silver polish from secret recipes, believing that commercial preparations didn't achieve proper results. These recipes involved chalk, ammonia, and mysterious ingredients that probably violated several laws of chemistry, if not physics. The butler's polish was a professional secret, handed down like a family treasure, and woe betide any footman who used it without permission. "The mistress is expecting 8 tonight," Mr. Graves says, breaking the silence. "The Harrington party plus the Calthorpes." Mr. Jenkins nods, calculating what this means for service. "The Harringtons are punctual. The Calthorpes are always late." "We shall be prepared for both possibilities. Have Thomas stationed at the door from 7:45. The family will receive in the drawing room from 8. Dinner at 8:30, assuming all guests have arrived." "And if the Calthorpes are delayed?" "The family will proceed to dinner at 8:45 regardless. Better to begin without them than to let the soup cool." This is the precision that defines Mr. Graves's service. Every contingency planned, every timing calculated, every potential disaster anticipated and neutralized. He's been managing dinner parties for 40 years, and he's learned that the difference between success and catastrophe is usually about 8 minutes and the ability to improvise without looking like you're improvising. The afternoon is consumed with preparations. The dining room must be set, a process that involves precise measurement and artistic arrangement. The tablecloth must be centered exactly, its overhang equal on all sides. The china must be placed according to a spatial geometry that would make Euclid weep. Dinner plates exactly 1 inch from the table edge, side plates at precise angles, glasses positioned in graduated sizes from left to right. The silver must be placed according to usage order. Utensils for the first course on the outside, working inward through subsequent courses. Each piece must be perfectly aligned, parallel or perpendicular to its neighbors, with spacing measured to the fraction of an inch. Mr. Graves oversees this setup personally, carrying a measuring tape and a critical eye. He adjusts a spoon's position by half an inch. He rotates a wine glass 3 degrees. He moves a salt cellar 2 inches to the right, then back 1 inch to the left, and then settles on 1½ inches right as the perfect compromise. Joke 2. Thomas swears he once saw Mr. Graves use a protractor to position a dessert fork, though no one believes him, because even Mr. Graves's obsession with precision presumably has limits. Presumably. The flowers must be perfect, but not ostentatious. The candles tall, but not towering. The menu cards hand-lettered and positioned at each setting like small paper prophecies of the meal to come. By 6 o'clock, the dining room looks like a photograph, a perfect still life of wealth and taste. Mr. Graves walks around the table one final time, inspecting from every angle, then nods his approval. Satisfactory. Now ensure the decanters are filled, the wines selected, and Thomas has had time to change into proper livery. The wine cellar is Mr. Graves's other kingdom, a cool stone room in the basement where bottles rest in racks like sleeping aristocrats. He descends the stairs with a candle, because the cellar has no gas lighting. Flames and wine are incompatible risks, and Mr. Graves trusts only his own careful candle management. The cellar's inventory represents decades of the master's collecting and Mr. Graves's careful stewardship. Ports aged to perfection, Burgundies laid down in good years, champagnes reserved for celebrations, sherries and Madeiras for the ladies, and a collection of clarets that Mr. Graves knows more intimately than he knows most people. He selects wines for tonight with the care of a composer choosing instruments for a symphony. A light sherry to begin, a crisp white for the fish course, a robust red for the joint, a delicate dessert wine for pudding, and port for after dinner, when the ladies have retired and the gentlemen wish to discuss serious matters while getting progressively more intoxicated. Each bottle is dusted, inspected for cork integrity, and carried upstairs like a fragile infant. Mr. Graves decants the red wine himself, because this is a task requiring judgment and reverence. The wine must breathe without oxidizing, be freed from sediment without violence, and be presented at precisely the right temperature. Mainstream fact. Wine service was a crucial element of Victorian dining, and butlers were expected to have extensive knowledge of vintages, pairings, and serving protocols. Some butlers kept detailed notebooks recording which wines were served at which dinners, which guests preferred which styles, and which bottles were best saved for important occasions. The butler effectively managed a liquid asset worth hundreds or even thousands of pounds. "Good evening, Sir Richard, Lady Harrington," he intones, his voice carrying exactly the right mixture of welcome and formality. The guests enter, surrendering coats and hats to Thomas, while Mr. Graves announces them to the family in the drawing-room. His voice carries through the house with trained projection. "Sir Richard and Lady Harrington." The family rises to greet their guests. Mr. Graves retreats to supervise the next arrival, maintaining his post like a lighthouse keeper watching for ships. The Calthorpes arrive at 8:17, fashionably late but not disastrously so. Mr. Graves receives them with the same measured courtesy, giving no indication that their tardiness has thrown off his carefully calculated timeline, though internally he's recalculating every subsequent timing by 3 minutes. At 8:35, with all guests present and the drawing-room conversation reaching the natural lull that signals readiness, Mr. Graves announces dinner, with a discreet cough that somehow carries more authority than most people's shouts. Dinner is served. The procession to the dining room is choreographed with the precision of a royal ceremony. The master leads with the highest-ranking lady, followed by pairs arranged by precedence and tradition. Mr. Graves oversees this parade from the sidelines, ensuring no one stumbles, loses their way, or violates social protocol. The dining room glows with candlelight and ambition. The guests murmur appreciation at the table setting, which is the highest compliment Mr. Graves will receive, and which he accepts with a nearly imperceptible nod. Service begins. Mr. Graves and Thomas move around the table like practiced dancers, serving from the left, removing from the right, pouring wine with bottles wrapped in napkins to catch drips, and maintaining an expression of attentive invisibility. The art of good service is to be present without being noticed, to anticipate needs before they're spoken, to move silently through the room like beneficial ghosts. Mr. Graves has perfected this art over 40 decades, developing an almost supernatural ability to know when a glass needs refilling or a plate needs clearing. Joke 3. Thomas claims Mr. Graves can smell when someone's wine glass is getting low, a superpower that's either impressive or slightly creepy, depending on how you feel about being monitored by your butler's nose. The conversation at the table flows around topics that servants hear but must never acknowledge: politics, scandal, business concerns, social gossip. Mr. Graves maintains perfect discretion, his face revealing nothing even when Lady Harrington mentions something that contradicts what she told the mistress last week, or when Sir Richard's views on the railway shares directly oppose the master's. This discretion is the butler's most valuable quality. He knows every secret, hears every conversation, observes every family tension and social complication. He could write a novel that would scandalize London. Instead, he maintains the silence that's expected of his position, understanding that trust is more valuable than gossip. Mainstream fact. The phrase, "the butler did it," popular in murder mysteries, reflects a real anxiety about how much servants knew and how that knowledge could be weaponized. Butlers were privy to family secrets, financial difficulties, and personal scandals. A discreet butler was worth his considerable salary. A talkative one could destroy a family's reputation in an afternoon. The courses proceed with mechanical precision. Soup is served at 8:40, consumed and cleared by 8:55. Fish appears at 9, accompanied by the white wine Mr. Graves selected. The entree follows at 9:30. The joint at 10, carved by the master at the table in a display of domestic authority, while Mr. Graves stands ready to assist if the carving goes poorly, which it occasionally does when the master has had enough wine to effect his knife work. Between courses, Mr. Graves retreats to his pantry, where he can supervise the flow of dishes from kitchen to dining room, ensure the next course is ready, and maintain the illusion that food materializes through some form of domestic magic rather than through cook's increasingly frantic activity in the overheated kitchen below. He communicates with cook through a system of signals and intermediaries, never entering her kitchen directly, because that would be a territorial violation neither can afford. Agnes carries messages. The fish was excellent. The sauce perhaps a touch thick. The joint is perfect. Proceed with the game course. Cook receives these messages like diplomatic cables, accepting praise with suspicion and criticism with rage, but ultimately respecting Mr. Graves's judgment because he's the one who sees how the family reacts to her work. By 11:30, the dessert course has been served and cleared. The ladies rise to retire to the drawing-room for coffee and conversation, while the gentlemen remain for port and cigars. This is Mr. Graves's cue to produce the port decanter, pour calculated glasses, and position the cigar box within reach.
The master's study, where the gentleman will relocate after port, has been prepared by the footman. Fire burning well, chairs arranged for conversation, the good brandy decanted, ashtrays positioned strategically. Mr. Graves inspects this setup one final time, adjusting a chair by 2 inches and straightening a picture frame that was probably fine before he touched it. The evening winds down in stages. The gentlemen eventually join the ladies in the drawing-room. More coffee is served. The guests begin to make departing noises around midnight, those polite signals that the evening has been delightful but should probably end before it becomes tomorrow. Mr. Graves stations himself at the door for the exodus, helping guests into coats, ensuring they have their belongings, and accepting thanks with appropriate dignity. "Good night, Mr. Graves. Excellent dinner." "Thank you, Sir Richard. Good night." The door closes on the last guest at 12:20. The family retires upstairs, leaving the servants to face the aftermath. The dining room is a battlefield of dirty dishes, used glassware, and napkins that look like they lost a fight with the dessert course. Mr. Graves oversees the clearing with the same attention he gave to the setup. The silver must be collected, washed, dried, and locked away. The china must be hand-washed with reverence. The glasses must be polished until they sparkle. The linens must be bundled for laundering. The dining room must be restored to its pristine pre-dinner state, as if the evening never happened. This work will continue until 2 or 3 in the morning, but Mr. Graves will see it through, because it is his responsibility, and because sloppiness in cleanup is sloppiness in character. Thomas yawns and immediately regrets it when Mr. Graves's gaze fixes on him like a disapproving laser. "Tired, Thomas?" "No, sir, just accommodating extra oxygen, sir." "Indeed. Then you'll have no trouble polishing the epergne until it's perfect." Thomas accepts the elaborate silver centerpiece with a sinking heart, knowing that Mr. Graves's definition of perfect exists in a realm beyond human achievement, but must be pursued anyway. Quirky tidbit. The butler's pantry often contained a small bed or cot because butlers were expected to be available at all hours. Some slept in their pantries, surrounded by locked silver and valuable wines, serving as both manager and security guard. They were the last to sleep and the first to rise, making the butler's life one of near constant vigilance. Mr. Graves retires to his pantry at 3 in the morning, satisfied that the evening was a success and that his standards have been maintained. He settles into his chair with a small glass of the cooking sherry, one of his few acknowledged vices, and reviews the evening in his mind. The service was smooth, the timing was precise. The family's reputation remains intact. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, a luncheon party, afternoon callers, another dinner. The cycle never ends, but Mr. Graves has long ago made peace with infinity. He finishes his sherry, locks the pantry door, and retires to his small bedroom adjacent to his office. He removes his coat with care, hangs it properly, and lies down in his narrow bed, still somehow maintaining perfect posture, even while horizontal. Outside, the house settles into its deepest sleep. Upstairs, the family dreams in their comfortable beds. Below stairs, the servants collapse into exhausted unconsciousness. And in his pantry, Mr. Graves rests with the satisfaction of knowing he has upheld the standards that define his life. Tomorrow, the bell will ring, the door will need answering, the silver will need polishing, the wine will need selecting, and Mr. Graves will face it all with the same measured dignity he's maintained for 40 years. Because he is not just.
Miss Pierce sits in her mistress's dressing room, surrounded by the architecture of beauty. Gowns hanging like expensive ghosts, jewelry boxes guarding their treasures, and enough bottles of lotions and potions to stock a small chemist's shop. She's mending a hem on an evening dress, her needle moving with the mechanical precision of someone who's performed this task 10,000 times. The lady's maid occupies a peculiar position in the household hierarchy, intimately connected to the mistress, yet still fundamentally a servant, privy to secrets, yet powerless to use them, essential, yet replaceable. Miss Pierce has learned to navigate this contradiction with careful diplomacy and the ability to know everything while appearing to know nothing. She's 35, unmarried, dressed in black that's slightly better quality than the housemaids' uniforms, but not quite as fine as the mistress's simplest day dress. Her hair is arranged in a style that's neat without being stylish, appropriate without being ambitious. She's learned to be a mirror that reflects well on her mistress without competing for attention. The relationship between lady and maid is complicated by enforced intimacy. Miss Pierce sees her mistress in states no one else does, half-dressed, crying, angry, vulnerable, vain. She knows which dresses make the mistress feel confident and which ones she wears when she wants her husband to notice her. She knows about the gray hairs that are carefully pulled out each week, the waist measurements that fluctuate with worry and corsets, the little vanities and insecurities that the mistress would never admit to anyone with social standing. Mainstream fact: a lady's maid was expected to be skilled in hairdressing, sewing, laundering delicate fabrics, and understanding fashion. She maintained her mistress's wardrobe, which in a wealthy household might include dozens of day dresses, evening gowns, walking costumes, and riding habits. She traveled with her mistress, acting as personal attendant, companion, and sometimes confidant. The position paid well, £20 to £40 per year, depending on the household, but demanded absolute discretion and loyalty. The morning routine begins at 8, when Miss Pierce enters the mistress's bedroom with hot water and tea. The curtains are drawn back carefully, letting in light without making it feel like an assault. The mistress wakes slowly, requiring patience and silence while she transitions from sleep to consciousness. "Good morning, ma'am," Miss Pierce says quietly, setting down the tea tray. The mistress makes a sound that might be acknowledgement or might be the last protest of sleep. She sits up gradually, accepting the teacup with hands that still remember being warm in bed. This is the mistress's private time before the day's performances begin, when she can be rumpled and human without judgment. Miss Pierce has learned that these morning minutes are when the mistress is most herself, before the corset goes on and the social armor is assembled. "What dress today, ma'am?" Miss Pierce asks, though she already knows. The mistress has a charity meeting at 11, calls to make in the afternoon, and dinner at home. This requires a specific combination of respectability, fashion, and comfort that Miss Pierce has memorized from similar previous days. "The blue wool, I think, with the jet buttons." Miss Pierce nods, already mentally preparing the undergarments, stockings, and accessories that will complete the outfit. Dressing a Victorian lady is an engineering project that requires planning, strength, and an understanding of physics that would impress a bridge builder. The corset comes first, that instrument of torture disguised as foundation garment. Miss Pierce laces it with practiced efficiency, pulling the strings tight while the mistress holds on to the bedpost and tries to remember why fashion demands that breathing is optional. Joke 1.
Miss Pierce has calculated that she's laced approximately 12,775 corsets in her career, which means she's essentially a professional rib compressor with a side interest in making women faint. The process of dressing takes an hour. Layer after layer must be added in the correct order: chemise, drawers, corset, corset cover, petticoats, multiple, bustle pad, dress, belt, collar, cuffs. Each item must be arranged properly, smoothed of wrinkles, adjusted for appearance. The mistress stands like a patient statue while Miss Pierce works, occasionally commenting on how the dress fits or expressing concern about whether the new maid is dusting the drawing room properly. Miss Pierce has learned to be both present and absent during these sessions. She listens when the mistress needs to talk, which is often, because the mistress has few other outlets for her thoughts. But she also knows when to be silent, letting her hands work while her ears rest. "I don't know what to do about Charlotte," the mistress says, referring to her daughter. "She's becoming so modern. Yesterday she asked about attending lectures. Lectures! As if I didn't raise her properly." Miss Pierce makes a sympathetic noise while arranging the dress's bustle, a complicated affair of fabric and architecture that makes the mistress's backside look like it's preparing to leave independently. "Perhaps she's curious, ma'am. Young ladies do have interests beyond the usual." "But lectures, what will people think?" Miss Pierce does not point out that people will probably think very little, because most people are too busy thinking about themselves. Instead, she says, "I'm sure you'll guide her appropriately, ma'am." This is the art of the lady's maid. Sympathetic without being opinionated, present without being intrusive, supporting the mistress's worldview while occasionally planting tiny seeds of alternative perspectives that might possibly, if given enough time and favorable conditions, grow into something approaching rational thought. The hair takes another 30 minutes. Victorian hairstyles are elaborate constructions that require skill, patience, and hairpins numbered in the dozens. Miss Pierce brushes the mistress's hair until it shines, then begins the process of arranging it into the day's style. Curling tongs are heated over a spirit lamp, a process that requires careful timing, because too hot means singed hair, and too cool means curls that collapse before luncheon. Miss Pierce tests the temperature on a piece of tissue paper, watching how quickly it browns, then begins creating ringlets and waves that will eventually be pinned into an arrangement that looks effortless but required genuine engineering. Quirky tidbit: some ladies' maids became so skilled at hairdressing that they were poached by other households at higher salaries. Hair was serious business in the Victorian era, a woman's crowning glory and a marker of femininity and status. A good lady's maid could create styles that made her mistress the envy of her social circle. A poor one could ruin a reputation with a single unfortunate fringe. Miss Pierce pins, arranges, and adjusts until the hairstyle is perfect. Then she fetches the jewelry: earrings, brooch, rings, bracelets. Each piece is selected to complement the dress and the occasion. Not too flashy for a morning call, not too plain for an appearance where the family's status must be demonstrated. By 10 o'clock, the mistress is fully assembled and ready to face the world. She looks in the mirror and sees a lady of fashion and refinement. Miss Pierce sees about 2 hours of her own labor and at least 3 pounds of various fabrics that will all need laundering, pressing, and maintenance before they can be worn again.
Thank you, Pierce. That will do. Ma'am. Miss Pierce curtsies slightly and withdraws, because even after years of intimate service, formality must be maintained. She's Pierce, never Mary. The mistress is Ma'am, never Mrs. Harrison by her first name. The distance is preserved even in proximity. While the mistress is out making calls, Miss Pierce has her own work. The mistress's bedroom must be tidied, the bed made with attention to the decorative pillows that serve no purpose except looking expensive. The dressing room must be organized, yesterday's clothes put away, today's evening dress selected and prepared. The wardrobe is
Thomas stands at attention in the entrance hall, hands clasped behind his back, face arranged in an expression of attentive neutrality. He's been standing here for 40 minutes, waiting for callers who may or may not arrive, because footmen are decorative as much as functional, and decoration doesn't get to sit down. He's 23, tall, and chosen for this position partly because of his height and appearance. Footmen are visible servants, the ones best see first, and wealthy households prefer them to look like they stepped out of a portrait rather than real life. His livery is elaborate: knee breeches, white stockings, a coat with the family's colors, and enough buttons to make getting dressed feel like solving a puzzle. The wig that footman wore in earlier decades has been abandoned, thankfully, but his hair must still be pomaded into submission. The life of a footman is a strange combination of physical labor and decorative standing. 1 hour he's carrying coal scuttles that weigh more than small children. The next he's standing motionless behind a chair during dinner, pretending he can't hear the conversation happening inches from his face. Joke 1. Thomas has perfected the art of standing so still that guests occasionally mistake him for furniture, which is either a professional achievement or evidence that his job is essentially to be a very expensive hat rack that occasionally moves. The footman's duties span the household. They answer the door, announce guests, serve at meals, carry heavy items, run errands, and perform whatever tasks the butler assigns with the casual authority of someone who knows his orders will be followed. Thomas shares his quarters with William, the underfootman, who's 19 and still learning the elaborate choreography of service. Their room is small, but better than the maids' attic spaces. Footmen are valued servants, and their accommodation reflects this slightly elevated status. "How long have you been standing there?" William asks, appearing from the servants' hall with a tray. "Forever, possibly since the Norman Conquest. I've lost track." "Mrs. Pemberton cancelled her call. Message just came." Thomas deflates with relief. "Then I've been standing here for nothing." "That's service, mostly waiting for things that don't happen." They retreat to the servants' hall, where Thomas can finally sit and restore feeling to his feet. The footmen occupy an odd social space below stairs, superior to the maids, but subordinate to the butler. Friendly with everyone, but intimate with none, because their position creates distance even from fellow servants. Mainstream fact: footmen were a status symbol for wealthy families. Having multiple footmen announced prosperity and taste. They were expected to be tall, 6 feet was preferred, good-looking and young. Many footmen left service by their 30s, as the position was generally reserved for younger men. They might advance to butler, though competition was fierce, or leave service entirely for other work. The morning's duties begin properly after breakfast. Thomas and William change into their working livery, less elaborate than the evening version, but still formal enough to maintain standards. They begin with the public rooms, opening curtains, checking fires, straightening furniture, and ensuring everything looks perfect for the family's use. Mr. Graves announces silently, in that way butlers have that suggests they might actually be supernatural, "The mistress commented yesterday that the fire smoked." Thomas and William exchange glances that communicate entire conversations. The fire didn't smoke, the mistress was in a mood, but we'll spend an hour fixing an imaginary problem because that's what service means.
They clean the fireplace, relay the fire, check the chimney draft, dust every surface nearby, and basically perform mechanical theater to demonstrate that the smoking problem, which never existed, has been solved through diligent attention. The drawing room is a museum of breakable things. Every surface holds ornaments that cost more than Thomas earns in a year. Porcelain shepherdesses frozen in eternal pastoral bliss, crystal vases that catch light and probably cost actual light to purchase, silver frames containing photographs of family members arranged in order of importance. Dusting here requires the steady hands of a surgeon and the nerves of a gambler. One slip, one moment of inattention, and Thomas could destroy something that would take years of wages to replace. He's learned to dust while barely breathing, as if oxygen might create vibrations that lead to catastrophe. Quirky tidbit. Some footmen wore white cotton gloves while handling valuable items, both to protect the objects from skin oils and to protect themselves from blame if something broke. The gloves made everything more difficult, but provided plausible deniability. If an item broke while gloved hands held it, clearly the object was defective rather than the servant careless. The afternoon brings errands. Thomas is sent to the post office with letters, the chemist for the mistress's headache powders, and the library to return books and collect new ones. These errands are both a relief and a responsibility. Relief because they mean escaping the house, responsibility because he's representing the family in public. He walks through London streets wearing his livery, which marks him as clearly as a uniform marks a soldier. People know he's a servant, know which household he employs him, the livery's colors advertise this, and will judge his employers by his appearance and behavior. Other servants pass, and there's an unspoken acknowledgement, a nod from a fellow footman, a smile from a housemaid on her errands. They're part of an invisible workforce that keeps the city running, known to each other, but unseen by the classes they serve. At the library, Thomas collects the new books the mistress requested. The librarian knows him by sight now, after years of these collections. They chat briefly about weather and trivialities, one of the few moments where Thomas can be almost normal rather than constantly performing servitude. "How's the household?" the librarian asks. "Same as always. Everyone wants something and everything's urgent. The burden of service. The burden of everyone else's convenience." Joke 2. Thomas has calculated that he walks approximately 15 miles per day within the house and on errands, which means he's essentially doing a part-time job as a pedestrian while also being a full-time servant, making him either very fit or very tired, mostly tired. Back at the house, preparations begin for evening service. Dinner tonight is formal. 8 guests, multiple courses, the full performance of wealthy entertaining. Thomas and William change into their evening livery, the elaborate uniforms that transform them into decorative elements of the dining experience. They position themselves in the dining room under Mr. Graves' supervision, receiving final instructions about service order, wine selections, and the absolute necessity of not dropping anything or having opinions. "Remember," Mr. Graves says, this suggests that is instruction and a threat. "You are present but not present, visible but not noticed. You serve from the left, remove from the right, and under no circumstances do you react to anything you hear. Is that clear?" "Yes, Mr. Graves," they chorus. The guests arrive. Thomas stands at attention in the entrance hall, ready to take coats and hats. Each guest receives the same measured courtesy, although Thomas has learned to gauge their personalities within seconds. The kind ones who thank him, the indifferent ones who look through him, the demanding ones who will find fault with everything. Sir Richard is pompous, announcing his arrival as if expecting trumpets. Lady Harrington is kind but vague, handing over her cloak while discussing something with her husband and only half noticing Thomas exists. The Calthorpes are late and flustered, apologizing to everyone except the servants, because servants don't count as someone's who deserve apologies.
The guests discuss politics with the confidence of people who've never actually experienced consequences. They debate the servant problem,
while being served by servants who can hear every word. They discuss the poor with a mixture of sympathy and suspicion. They share gossip about absent friends with barely concealed delight. Thomas serves mutton to Sir Richard, while Sir Richard explains why the working classes need firm guidance. He pours wine for Lady Harrington while she describes her charity work helping unfortunate girls, never noticing that Thomas's sister is one of those unfortunate girls working in a factory because service didn't pay enough to support their family. Mainstream fact. Servants were expected to maintain absolute discretion about family affairs and conversations they overheard. This created a strange dynamic where intimate family discussions happened in the presence of servants, who were supposed to be simultaneously present and invisible. Some servants found this difficult and left positions where they were privy to information they'd rather not know. Others learned to develop a professional deafness, hearing without listening, present without engaging. The dinner stretches for hours. Thomas's feet ache, his back is stiff from maintaining perfect posture, and his face hurts from holding a neutral expression. But he serves each course with practiced efficiency, removes each plate with quiet competence, and maintains the illusion that this is his life's purpose rather than his employment. Between courses, he retreats to the butler's pantry where he can briefly drop the performance. William is there, rubbing his feet and complaining about Lady Calthorpe's habit of changing her mind about wine after it's been poured. "She's done it 3 times, William groans. "First she wanted white, then red, then back to white. I'm going to pour both simultaneously and see what happens." "You'll get fired is what will happen. Worth it for the expression on Mr. Graves's face." They return to service, masks back in place, ready for the next courses and the next hours of visible invisibility. By midnight, when the last guest has departed and the family has retired, Thomas is exhausted in ways that physical labor alone can't achieve. It's not just the standing and carrying, it's the constant performance, the perpetual suppression of reactions and opinions, the relentless requirement to be less than human so that others can feel more important. He and William clean up the dining room under Mr. Graves' supervision, restoring order from chaos. Then they're finally released to their room, where they collapse with the relieved groans of people who've been holding uncomfortable positions for 6 hours. "I heard Sir Richard say that servants have it easy," William says, unlacing his painful shoes. "Apparently we just stand around waiting for orders, no real work at all. Next time he can stand for 6 hours while someone explains why he's lazy." They prepare for bed, hanging their livery carefully because creases are moral failings, washing quickly in cold water, and falling into their narrow beds with relief. Tomorrow will bring more standing, more carrying, more performing servitude for people who will never see them as fully human. But for now, they sleep. Joke 3. Thomas swears that when he leaves service, he'll never stand still again. He'll either be sitting or running, nothing in between, and anyone who asks him to hold a position for aesthetic purposes will receive a lecture about the human body's need for movement. The candles go out. The room darkens. Tomorrow they'll rise early and begin again. The endless cycle of service, the performance of invisibility, the strange life of being essential yet unnoticed, present yet absent, valuable yet replaceable. But for now, they sleep.
The scullery maid has been coughing for 3 days. At first, she tried to hide it, muffling the sound in her apron during the brief moments she could stop scrubbing dishes. But by the 3rd morning, the coughing is loud enough that even Cook notices, and Cook notices only things that directly interfere with dinner preparation. "You sound like a tuberculosis ward," Cook announces cheerfully while chopping onions. "Go see Mrs. Blackwood." Mary drags herself to the housekeeper's room, where Mrs. Blackwood receives her with the enthusiasm usually reserved for discovering mice in the linen cupboard. "You're ill." "Just a cold, ma'am." "Sit down before you fall down." Mrs. Blackwood examines Mary with the practiced eye of someone who's managed servant health for decades.
The girl is flushed with fever, her hands are trembling, and that cough suggests something more serious than a simple cold. How long has this been going on? 3 days, ma'am, maybe 4. And you didn't report it immediately because? Mary stares at her feet because the answer is obvious. Reporting illness means potential dismissal, or, at best, unpaid time off that she can't afford. Better to work sick than to risk unemployment. Mainstream fact. Servants often worked through illness because they had no sick pay and feared dismissal if they couldn't perform their duties. This created a dangerous cycle where illnesses spread through households, infecting both servants and family members. The close quarters of servants' accommodation made disease transmission rapid. Tuberculosis, typhoid, scarlet fever, and influenza moved through households with alarming speed. Mrs. Blackwood sighs the sigh of housekeepers throughout history who understand that compassion and practicality are rarely on speaking terms. You'll go to bed immediately. I'll inform cook that she needs to manage without you until you're recovered. But ma'am, the dishes. The dishes will survive. Your lungs might not. Bed now. Mary is sent to her attic room, a space so cold that being sick here might be worse than working through illness. Mrs. Blackwood sends Agnes up with a hot brick wrapped in flannel for warmth, willow bark tea for the fever, and strict instructions that Mary is to rest and not feel guilty, which is like asking water not to be wet. The household medicine chest is a wooden box filled with remedies ranging from genuinely helpful to actively dangerous. Mrs. Blackwood reviews the contents: laudanum for pain, ipecac for purging, calomel for general purposes, despite being mercury-based and probably responsible for more problems than it solves, camphorated oil for rubbing on chests, and various herbal preparations whose effectiveness depends more on faith than chemistry. She prepares a mixture for Mary: willow bark for fever, honey for the cough, a small amount of laudanum to help her sleep. It's the best medical care available below stairs, which means it's barely adequate but given with genuine concern. Quirky tidbit. Many households kept medical guides for treating servants, books with titles like The Housekeeper's Guide to Common Ailments, that prescribed remedies based on humoral theory, folk wisdom, and occasional actual medical knowledge. Treatments ranged from reasonable, like rest in fluids for fever, to bizarre, like applying leeches to draw out bad blood, to dangerous, mercury compounds for nearly everything. The family doctor is summoned, but not for Mary. The doctor is for family members and upper servants, whose loss would significantly disrupt the household. Scullery maids are expected to either recover on their own or be replaced. It's a brutal calculation that everyone understands, but no one discusses openly. Mrs. Blackwood, however, has seen too many servants die from neglected illnesses to be entirely heartless. If Mary's condition worsens, she'll push for proper medical attention, even if it means arguing with the mistress about expenditure. By afternoon, Mary's fever has worsened. She's delirious, coughing so hard that Agnes, sleeping in the next room, can hear her through the thin walls. Agnes reports this to Mrs. Blackwood, who makes the decision to move Mary to a warmer room, the small box room near her own quarters, and to call the doctor despite the cost. The doctor arrives with his bag of instruments and limited options. He examines Mary, listens to her lungs with his stethoscope, and delivers his diagnosis with the confidence of someone who's only partially guessing. Bronchitis, possibly pneumonia developing. She needs rest, warmth, and careful nursing. Can she recover? Mrs. Blackwood asks. With proper care and luck, yes. Without it, he shrugs, a gesture that encompasses all the working-class people who die from illnesses that wouldn't kill someone with resources. He prescribes rest, beef tea for strength, continued use of cough remedies, and mustard plasters applied to the chest. The mustard plasters are medieval torture disguised as medicine. Paste spread on cloth, applied to the skin and left until it burns enough to draw out the illness, which is medical theory from an era that believed in balancing humors. Joke 1. The doctor's prescription basically amounts to keep her warm, feed her, and burn her chest periodically, which is either cutting-edge Victorian medicine or elaborate justification for charging 5 shillings. Mrs. Blackwood organizes Mary's care with military efficiency. Agnes takes on the scullery work in addition to her kitchen duties, which means she's now doing 2 jobs and sleeping 4 hours a night. Sarah, one of the housemaids, is assigned to check on Mary regularly, bringing her beef tea, changing her mustard plasters, and sitting with her during the worst coughing fits. The household adjusts around Mary's absence. Cook complains, but manages. The dishes pile up more than usual, but get washed eventually. The machine continues running, proving both that individuals are replaceable and that their work is harder than anyone upstairs realizes. Mary's fever breaks after 5 days. She wakes clear-headed but weak, her chest still tight, her cough persistent but less violent. Mrs. Blackwood visits and finds her sitting up, sipping beef tea, and looking guilty about being alive and useless. "Don't even think about returning to work until I say so," Mrs. Blackwood warns. "The last thing we need is you collapsing into the scullery sink." "Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am." The gratitude is genuine and heartbreaking. Mary is thanking Mrs. Blackwood for providing medical care that should be basic human decency, but is actually an unusual kindness in a system that views servants as replaceable machinery. Mainstream fact. Tuberculosis was a leading cause of death among domestic servants, particularly those working in poorly ventilated spaces. The combination of long hours, inadequate nutrition, cold sleeping quarters, and close contact with infected individuals created perfect conditions for disease transmission. Some households dismissed servants at the first sign of TB, both to prevent spread and to avoid the cost of care. Other illnesses circulate through the servants' quarters with depressing regularity. A footman develops a painful boil that makes sitting unbearable, walking difficult, and his mood even worse than usual. He's treated with hot poultices and stoic suffering until it finally drains, an event celebrated with the enthusiasm usually reserved for royal births. One of the housemaids gets sick headaches that make her vomit and see lights. Mrs. Blackwood recognizes these as migraines and prescribes dark rooms, cold compresses, and small doses of laudanum. The maid learns to predict when attacks are coming and works frantically beforehand to complete tasks, knowing she'll lose hours or days to incapacitation. Agnes develops chilblains on her hands from constant immersion in cold water. Her fingers swell and crack, bleeding into the dishwater, which can't be hygienic but is unavoidable. She treats them with lanolin and wrapped bandages, working through pain because stopping isn't an option. The cook's assistant cuts herself badly while chopping vegetables, a deep gash across her palm that bleeds enthusiastically and terrifyingly. Mrs. Blackwood washes it with carbolic acid, painful but antiseptic, wraps it tightly, and instructs the girl to keep it elevated. The girl is terrified it will become infected and cost her her hand, but antibiotics don't exist yet, so fear and hope are the only treatments available. Infectious diseases move through the household like unwanted guests. When the family's youngest child develops measles, the servants who tend him inevitably catch it. Sarah falls ill with the characteristic rash and fever, followed by Agnes, then one of the footmen. The household becomes a makeshift infirmary, with Mrs. Blackwood managing cases while trying to prevent further spread. The measles outbreak forces a reckoning with ventilation and hygiene. Windows are open despite the cold, rooms are fumigated with burning sulfur, bedding is boiled, the servants' quarters are cleaned with unusual thoroughness, revealing dirt deposits that have accumulated since approximately the medieval period. Quirky tidbit, Victorian fumigation involved burning sulfur candles in sealed rooms to purify the air of disease. This produced sulfur dioxide gas, which definitely killed something, possibly including the lungs of anyone who entered too soon, but did little against actual pathogens. Still, it made people feel they were taking decisive action, which is sometimes half the battle. The household's relationship with medicine is a mixture of folk remedies, emerging scientific understanding, and pure desperation. When someone has a toothache, the solution might be oil of cloves, actually helpful, whiskey, marginally helpful, or simply wait until it falls out on its own, not helpful, but often what happens. For digestive troubles, there's castor oil, which is simultaneously treatment and punishment. Its effectiveness is debatable, but its ability to make people regret being born is well established.
For women's troubles, meaning anything related to menstruation or reproductive health, there's a conspiracy of silence punctuated by whispered remedies involving raspberry leaf tea, hot water bottles, and determination. Mrs. Blackwood maintains a supply of rags for menstruation, distributed discreetly and laundered separately, because discussing bodily functions is nearly as taboo as experiencing them. Joke 2, the household medical system can be summarized as ignore it until it goes away, apply something that stings, or take laudanum until you don't care anymore. This covers approximately 90% of Victorian medical practice. Mental health receives even less understanding than physical illness. When Sarah becomes deeply melancholy after her sister dies, crying uncontrollably and unable to perform her duties, Mrs. Blackwood tries to help but has no framework for understanding depression. She offers sympathy, light duties, and suggests prayer, because mental illness is either a moral failing or a mystery that medicine can't touch. The doctor, when consulted, prescribes a change of air and occupation of the mind, which translates to send her away and hope time heals it. Sarah eventually returns to functionality through the brutal necessity of working or starving, but the grief follows her like a shadow. The household also deals with pregnancy, though this is never discussed openly. When a housemaid shows obvious signs, she's usually dismissed, sometimes with a small payment to ease conscience, sometimes without. Unmarried pregnancy is a moral catastrophe in Victorian eyes, proof of fallen character regardless of circumstances. Mrs. Blackwood has helped a few girls over the years, providing names of lying-in hospitals, advice about charities, and small amounts of money from her own wages. It's not enough, but it's something done quietly because even compassion must maintain respectability's appearance. The accumulation of minor ailments, bad backs, sore feet, arthritic hands, chronic coughs, mark long-term servants like battle scars. Mrs. Blackwood's hands are gnarled from decades of work. The cook's feet are misshapen from years standing on hard floors. The butler's eyesight is failing from reading ledgers by inadequate light. These aren't treated because they're considered normal wear from work, the expected toll of service. You work until your body gives out. Then you retire if you've saved enough, or you continue working until you literally can't, at which point you hope for charity or face the workhouse. By the time Mary fully recovers and returns to the scullery, 2 weeks have passed. She's thinner, weaker, and permanently grateful to Mrs. Blackwood for care that saved her life. She returns to her dishes with renewed determination and a cough that will linger for months, a reminder that surviving illness in service is partly luck, partly care, and partly the stubborn refusal to give up. The medicine chest is returned to its shelf, its contents mostly unused because most illnesses either heal themselves or don't. The household returns to normal, where normal means everyone working through minor ailments and hoping to avoid major ones. Because in service, your health is both your most important asset and your most expendable one. Take care of it, but don't expect anyone else to.
The evening is winding down. The family has retired, the guests have departed, and the house is settling into its nighttime rhythms. You're exhausted, feet aching, back protesting every movement, but there's still the final round of duties before sleep can claim you. The drawing room needs a last check, the fires need banking, the doors need locking. The routines that close one day and prepare for the next must be completed, because tomorrow will come whether you're ready or not. Mrs. Blackwood makes her final rounds, checking that everything is secure, everyone accounted for, all tasks completed. Her keys jangle softly, a familiar evening song that signals the day's end. In the kitchen, Cook sits with her final cup of tea, reviewing tomorrow's menus in her head. The range glows softly, banked for the night, but ready to be coaxed back to life in a few hours when the cycle begins again. Mr. Graves locks the silver away with ceremonial care, each piece counted and accounted for, secure until morning demands its presence. He retires to his pantry, closing the door on another day of maintained standards and preserved dignity. The housemaids climb to their attic rooms, candles casting enormous shadows on the narrow stairs. They whisper good night to each other, sharing the day's small triumphs and disasters in the privacy of exhaustion. Thomas and William collapse into their beds, already half asleep, their fancy livery hung carefully, because tomorrow they'll need to look perfect again, decorative and dignified, invisible but essential. Miss Pierce finishes the last of her mending by candlelight, then retires to her small room, tomorrow's duties already planned in her methodical mind. You pull the thin blanket up to your chin, feeling the day's aches settle into your bones. The house creaks and sighs around you, this grand machine of domestic life that runs on the invisible labor of people like you. Tomorrow, the bell will ring in the darkness, the fires will need laying, the chamber pots will need emptying, the family will need serving, and you will rise, dress, and begin again, because this is service, and service never truly ends. But tonight, for these few hours, you rest. The house sleeps, finally, servants and family alike claimed by darkness and exhaustion. And in the morning, when the first bell rings and the cycle begins anew, you'll be ready. Because you're a servant in Victorian England, and this is your life, essential but invisible, valued but replaceable, human but required to be less than human so that others can be more. Sleep well while you can. Tomorrow is already waiting.